All right, here we go. We're getting started with trade rumors. Let's go, baby. Yeah, the regular season isn't even over, but I wanted to go out there and talk about this because it was brought up in an article on The Athletic, which will be linked in the description below. Today we're heading over to a team whose season isn't even over yet, but who still has one of the top potential trade targets of this year's offseason on their roster. Today we're talking about the Calgary Flames, who, as we had said, are playing later today, and we are talking about goaltender Jacob Markstrom. Because yes, we have made a few videos already over the past few weeks talking about Marky Mark and his situation with the Flames. Long story short, he's a good guy. He's very solid. But he's 34 years old, and his contract expires next season. 2026 is the expiration date, $6 million a year. He had a fairly good season this year, posting up a .905 save percentage and a .278 goals against. But as we all know, Markstrom is one of these top guys, and when he is on his game, he is one of the best at his game. He can be a Vezina caliber guy, even though he is pretty old, and even though he is on a team like the Calgary Flames. Now sure, the Flames have had success in prior years. It's what led Markstrom to becoming a Vezina nominated player in 21-22. That's when he had a .922 save percentage and everything was really good, and he started 63 games, but because the Calgary Flames are kind of stinking it up right now, because there isn't really an immediate short-term projection of them being good next year or in 2 seasons, there is a very big idea saying, hey, they'll probably trade Markstrom. It was probably a bad idea for them to not trade him at the deadline in the first place, and with all the salary stuff that was complicating a Markstrom trade to New Jersey and some other teams potentially, the fact that the Calgary Flames went on a mini run heading into the deadline and decided, hey, we're just going to keep him. Like, we're winning. Why not try to make the playoffs, right? Only for that plan to backfire in their face. It was kind of a short-sighted decision, but hey, you can't go out there and disrespect them too hard for wanting to commit to the bit, right? Or, excuse me, commit to life instead, because that's what this is all about. It's not a bit, it's life. Either way, we're going over to an article published by Julian McKenzie on April 8th. What could Dustin Wolf's next contract look like? Jacob Markstrom's future? This is your Calgary Flames mailbag. Now you get the drill. The Athletic is paid for material. Article is going to be linked in the description if you do have The Athletic and you want to read this yourself. We're also going to leave a link in the description, though, to this piece made on the Spectres hockey website from April 13th, 2024. This Lyle Richardson piece goes out there and describes what it is that Julian McKenzie writes about in regards to Markstrom right here. Julian McKenzie replied to several questions from his readers regarding the Flames' off-season plans. McKenzie will be surprised if Jacob Markstrom returns next season, partly because of how things played out with trade speculation, and partly due to where the Flames are compared to contending teams. The New Jersey Devils won't be the only team interested in Markstrom. McKenzie suggested the Toronto Maple Leafs could be a suitor if Ilya Samsonov doesn't pan out. The LA Kings and Detroit Red Wings also could seek upgrades between the pipes. Now, before we continue with the rest of this piece, I wanted to just go over these main ideas. New Jersey, Toronto, Detroit, LA. Could these teams be a new suitor for Jacob Markstrom and his long-term home? Now, if I'm going to be honest, there are a few teams here that don't really make too much sense in my opinion anymore, and the biggest one happens to be the New Jersey Devils. We'd already made a few videos talking about this, but because of the fact that the Devils got their guy in Jake Allen, because they seem to have believed in him a little bit more than maybe some Canadiens fans did at certain points throughout the year, there is a world, in my opinion, where you see Jake Allen being thrusted into a number 1 or number 1A splitting situation in New Jersey. Whether or not it's Jacob Markstrom that is the split, I don't really know. Marky is gonna make some money, and we already heard word that the Devils would be okay with retaining all of that cap hit and not forcing the Calgary Flames to hold any of that salary back, but of course that was all before Jake Allen got sent over to New Jersey. Who really knows if that's still the status quo? Things can change when you add on a goaltender like Jake Allen, who is certainly not cheap himself, and who is going to demand a fairly significant role. He's not going to want to be a part of a New Jersey team where they're going to start rotating goalies and maybe have a third guy step in there too, like the Montreal Canadiens did this season. For the sake of Jake Allen and for the sake of keeping things relatively simple in New Jersey, I don't necessarily think they can still have a foot in this Jacob Markstrom race. Meanwhile, for the Toronto Maple Leafs, we'll see the biggest test of Maple Leafs hockey into the postseason this year when they play the Boston Bruins in the first round. Big shout out over to the video we made yesterday going over our series preview between the Leafs and the Bees. But if we have one of a Samsonov or a Joe Woll who completely craps the bed, either of them do, let's say Martin Jones is forced to fill in as the tertiary guy, and if the Maple Leafs feel they need to go out there and get themselves a goalie, get Woll as the number 2, get rid of Samsonov, bye-bye, and, I don't know, just keep whomever else it is in the system. Maybe Jacob Markstrom's the guy. Who really knows? If the Calgary Flames walk back in their own assessment from earlier at the trade deadline and decide, hey, we can retain salary now, then the Maple Leafs have themselves a pretty interesting opportunity. They are, for sure, the best out of these 4 teams that are listed as potential Jacob Markstrom trade candidates, but it all just boils down to money. Even if there's 50% salary retained, would they be able to keep a $3 million guy like that? Who really knows? Markstrom, for me personally, I think he'd be fine in Toronto. I think he'd be really good in that environment. We already saw what he was like in Vancouver. He handled the pressure really easily, and he was really honest with the media, which I could say in some people's minds could have been a fault of his, but Marky was well beloved in Vancouver for all the ups and all the downs. Even though he wasn't perfect, he was still good enough to be considered a top-tier goalie, and his play on the ice reflected that. So, in Toronto, with as harsh media, I think it's going to be fine. Heading over to the other teams, though, the Detroit Red Wings are a conversation that we have had already on the channel. That was a video we made a few weeks ago, going over just the goaltending, the rotations in Detroit. Ville Husso, James Reimer, Alex Lyon. Sure, you'd like to say that Lyon would ideally be your number 1 guy into the future, considering his comeuppance this season. But if none of this stuff is guaranteed, if you're not 100% confident that it's going to work out, and you need a little bit more transitory goaltending before Sebastian Cossa and Trey Augustine make the team, maybe 2 years of Jacob Markstrom is all you need. Who really knows? He certainly would be an upgrade over Lyon, over Husso, over Reimer, so it's not really a talent perspective where you doubt the idea of Jacob Markstrom getting acquired by the Wings. It really is just a question of necessity, whether or not this is the guy that Detroit should target, whether or not the money works, and whether or not this would actually be appropriate to hold out on before you see your prospect goaltenders come onto the team and make an impact. It is kind of an interesting dilemma, and of course you have to think about the salaries, because we have talked about in prior videos the amount of guys the Wings are going to have to re-sign. Raymond, Seider as RFAs, Joe Veleno too, and then the UFAs, you've got Patty Kane, David Perron, a few guys out there that could demand some serious money. If Stevie Y is able to make it work with a Swedish goaltender, then hey, the Wings' chances of making the playoffs next year just go up by, let's say, triple the amount of percentage that they had this year. Honestly, a strong 50 to 60 game goaltender who could provide you with 9-15 plus save percentage goaltending is going to do you wonders. And if the Wings had that this prior season, they're probably in the playoffs. Just saying. Moving on to the final team here, it is the LA Kings that are discussed about in this article. And the Kings are in a weird spot because, as we had talked about, Cam Talbot has been very good. He had a 9-15 save percentage, had a 2.47 goals against. Sure, he had his ups and he had his downs, but the problem is Cam Talbot is expiring at the end of this season. He's making $1 million and he's 36 years old himself. So not only is he in the same timeline, but he's also going to be a free agent soon. So if the LA Kings are not able to stabilize that part of their roster, if they're not able to keep Talbot around for sure, then maybe a guy like Markstrom, who is under contract for the next 2 seasons, is a little bit more secure. Who really knows? The question is, though, would Marky be okay going to another Western Conference team? These other teams that we had talked about were all in the East, so it's a little bit easier timeline-wise, and if you want to talk about the time zones, the Sweden connection, etc., that was a point that we brought up in the Linus Ullmark conversation. Who knows if it applies to Marky here as well? But either way, these are the teams that are talked about. Let's go back over to the article and finish this video off by reading the Spectre's note. I'll also be surprised if Markstrom isn't traded this summer. The Devils were reportedly close to acquiring him in February before the deal fell through, and it's expected they'll try again this summer. McKenzie did note that Markstrom has a final say because his no-movement clause is intact. His $6 million AAV could be a potential sticking point too. So, out of these 4 teams, the Devils, the Wings, the Leafs, and the Kings, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the idea of a Jacob Markstrom trade. If you're a fan of any of these 4 teams, what are your opinions on acquiring the Flames' super sweet goaltender? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.